So hi everyone, I'm Daniel. I will be presenting this paper on the accessibility impacts of Crossrail projects. Just to give a little bit of background, I just recently finished an MSc in GIS at Birkbeck, and what I'm presenting today is the thesis for the master's that I did under the supervision of Dr. Joana Barros. So the reason I chose to do this topic is because I knew I wanted to do something, research something with transport and public transport impacts and the public transport, the impacts of public transport investment. And while doing some research on the subject, I ran across these papers from Canadian researchers, WISERD and Al-Janaivi, that were looking at accessibility to low-income jobs in different cities in Canada. And they were arguing that usually accessibility to employment is looked at all jobs altogether, but they were saying that not everyone has the skills and experience to access all the jobs. So they were promoting the idea of looking at accessibility to income jobs, specifically for social vulnerable residents. And this other paper that I looked at by Manau and Al-Janaivi as well, that we're looking at who benefits from public transport infrastructure. And they were looking at transport provision in Montreal and how that would affect disadvantaged population. So I enjoyed both papers. I thought it would be something interesting to look at in the context of London, as well as in the context of Crossrail, since it's been the largest public transport investment in London in the last decade. So I went for that. And also Joana has done quite a lot of work with, some work with access to employment. So to have her expertise and support was also a big plus. And so the research questions were how access to employment will improve with the addition of Crossrail schemes, and who will it benefit, and how deprived communities will be affected, and whether it would contribute to equity. And so this is the proposed Crossrail lines in London, Crossrail 1 that runs from east to west through major economic centers, Heathrow Airport, the West End, the City, and Canary Wharf, which will be open next year, I think. And this is Crossrail 2, which will connect areas in the lower Lee Valley area to the southwest, connecting through central London and opening up a new station at Chelsea. And this line was supposed to go ahead, was still in the planning stages, but it was cut due to budget concerns after COVID. So this is the accessibility equation that I use. For those who are not familiar with accessibility as a concept, it is a measure that basically tells how easy it is to access jobs or retails or schools or any destination that is of particular interest from different areas in the study area, which in this case I have used as centroids for LSOAs in the 2011 census. So what it does, it trades off the cost of reaching the destination against the benefits of reaching that destination to give a value that can be expressed in time, in distance, the kilometers it takes to get to that area, or also in money or combination of both. Okay, so in this case, the equation, this is the accessibility value for a given area, and O are the number of opportunities at the destination. F is the deterrent function that basically what it does is it decreases the value of accessibility as the cost of getting to the destination increases, and Cij is the actual cost of traveling from zone I to J. So for this analysis, I used two different ways of calculating the deterrent function. The first one that I used is the most common accessibility assessments and employment that I seen while I was researching the subject, and also in local council planning. It basically says that if the cost here is expressed in travel time. So if the travel time of traveling from I to J is within a threshold, it results in 1. And if it is not, it results in 0, which effectively tells you the number of jobs you can reach within a 45 minutes, for example, from one area. And the other measure that I used takes into account financial costs as well. So here CIJ is a combination of the time it takes to access the public transport network against the way that it increases the cost as the time to access is bigger. Then there's the time waiting for transport to arrive. So the time that someone's waiting at the station, waiting for the train to arrive against a similar wait. The time of actual travel, and then the financial cost is transformed into time units using a value of time. This is a value given by the Transport Analysis Guidance on the DFT, which essentially says how much a user is willing to pay to save time while traveling. And for London, on cheap travel, it said that £8.42 per hour. And in the end, it just sums the number of interchanges. So that cost is powered to a constant value, and 1 is divided by this value, and it basically returns a number that traded against the number of opportunities, it will give less value to opportunities that have a higher cost of reaching them. And so this TAVI area, in this case, as I said, I chose the London, and the centroids for the 2011 LSOAs, there were a total of 4,835 origins and 241 destinations for all employment and 122 for low-income jobs. The way in which I chose the destinations where there are concentration of employment was using the workplace population data set from the census, and the low-income jobs were set using the standard occupational classification for the census. So I basically looked at which of these categories their average weekly income was below the London living wage, and if the median value for the average weekly income was below the London living wage, I would classify this the jobs that were counted under this classification as low-income jobs. And for this case was there's an error here. It's the 6, the 7, and the 8. So carrying leisure, sales and customer, and elementary occupations. Those were counted as low income. This is how it distributes across London. On top, these are the locations of areas that have been set as a destination for all jobs, and at the bottom, the ones for low-income jobs. And here are the numbers to see a little bit which areas concentrate the majority of jobs. And you can see that it's mainly Westminster, City of London, Camden, Tower Hamlets, all concentrated in this area are the ones that have a major density of employment. And you can also see that Hillingdon here for Heathrow has a high number of low-income jobs. So they were distributed actually quite equally across the whole study area. The travel times and the financial costs for each trip were calculated using OpenTripPlanner, which is an open software for an open source software for routes planning. And what it requires to perform this, to compute all these estimates, is a street network for model from OpenStreetMap and public transport network schedules for in the GTFs format. And I got them for all types of transport in London: bus, tube, tram, and rail. And so it calculated about 1.5 million journeys, which were set with the criteria below, which is they were to happen on a Tuesday, arriving at the destination by 9 a.m. and with a maximum distance, walking distance allowed of 800 meters to account for some walking between the Orford and the public transport stations, and at the other end, the same. The results, first I look at from difference between accessibility to all jobs and to low income jobs. As you can see from the box plots here, the measures calculated in total the difference between access to all jobs and to low income jobs. It's not that different. The distribution on all measures is pretty much the same, which it kind of told me that either the distinction that I used to locate low-income jobs was not adequate, or that this distinguishing between low-income jobs and all jobs in the context of London, which is a quite service-based economy and concentrated around the central economic center, might not be relevant in this case, as it might have been in North America, where the distinction between special areas might be bigger. And just to show you how this looks mapped, this is the baseline accessibility to all jobs. So we've had Crossrail, and this is the same accessibility to low-income jobs without Crossrail. You can see that the distribution and the patterns look pretty much the same, with the only exception of here Heathrow, that, as I said before, had like a higher number of low-income jobs. For the cumulative opportunity measure, at the shorter threshold, central areas in London have seen most of the increases. These maps show the number of jobs reached at different thresholds. On top, there's baseline without Crossrail, and in the bottom, it's with Crossrail. So you can see a little bit how in areas where Crossrail runs through, like here for Crossrail 1, but the number of jobs reached at a shorter threshold have increased. And you can see these lines as well on all the other thresholds. And basically by 1 hour time, the number of jobs reached across all London has increased considerably. These increases, so the change, the variance between baseline and the Crossrail situation, the short thresholds, central areas have seen a bigger increase, whereas in the outer areas, the increase has been more noted in outer areas, so not so much in central London. Not specifically, not necessarily just across Crossrail stations, but also in areas that might have an improved connection. Thanks to the new Crossrail lines, have also seen the increase in the number of jobs reached. Here, that's the results for the gravity-based measure, and as in the other ones, you can spot a little bit. At least Crossrail 1 here. here the classification, the value that results from this measure does not mean anything. It's just a value where the higher the number, the higher the accessibility. So I've grouped them in 7 categories, and each category has the same range of values on both maps so that they can be compared to each other. And when you look at the increase in values, the accessibility has increased more spread across all the study area, not just either in the central or the outer area of London, but most notably where services have been implemented, and also areas that, as I said, will have like a higher connectivity thanks to Crossrail, like this area right here that usually does not have any Crossrail service, but it has a good connection to Clapham Junction, which in turn will reach other destinations. And in terms of equity, I looked at how low deprived communities based on the index of multiple deprivation scores for 2019. So equity in that case has been assessed using the Pearson's R correlation analysis. So what I was looking at it was whether the increases in accessibility have been observed more prominently in LSOAs that have a higher degree of need. In all measures, that was not the case. The Pearson's R returns a number between -1 and 1. And in this case, the results were very close to 0, which it indicates that there's no correlation between these values.
You have a couple of minutes left, Daniel.
And in order to understand a little bit better how the results, who benefit from the results, I looked at the z-scores for all the accessibility values to see which LSOAs had improved the most when compared against all the other units in the area. So in that case, the bars that you can see on the screen, Ealing, Wandsworth, Greenwich, all of them were the ones that experienced higher increases in their z-score. So basically, LSOAs in those areas have progressed more when compared to all the others. And looking at various demographic profiles for these areas, it was that not areas that had a higher degree of need were benefited, but also basically like I lost my train of thought now, that areas of different degree of need were benefited, not just more rich areas, let's say, or less poor, but that it was spread across a whole degree of boroughs with different degree of needs. Inclusion and future awards. So here, between all jobs and low-income jobs, as I said, might not be relevant for the case of London. Accessibility has been found to increase more in outer boroughs. So from, let's say, zone 3 from like areas that are not in central London outwards. And that looking at different accessibility measures can yield different results, as you saw with the gravity base and community opportunities measure, where what increases in one were different from the other. And yeah, and finally for future works, I think the refinement of the transport model as well to make it more accurate and to be able to represent more times in the station. So travel time to access the station. If in a station, like if it has a tube and you have to access the platform that time was not accounted for. So I think that would be interesting to include, and also to investigate the impacts on different ethnic groups across London. And yeah, for me.
I've got a couple of questions. So obviously Crossrail 2, as you said, has been cancelled, or at least paused for the time being. Do you think your results would look any different if you do need to consider Crossrail 1?
Yeah, definitely. I think the results would look very different, specifically in the Southwest, which, as you can see, like one of the areas that saw a massive increase was Wandsworth, and that was due to Clapham Junction, which is in that borough, having a direct access to central London in a matter of like probably reducing the travel time by 10 minutes at least. So if Crossrail 2 was not implemented, these are the Southwest, Wandsworth, Richmond, and Merton would not see a significant increase as they have seen now.
Yeah, that's I guess an interesting outcome of that project being cancelled, in that those areas that may have been seen some upgrowth in popularity may not see that anymore. Just another quick one from me then. So you obviously said the data is from the 2011 census, so obviously may not have captured some developments. Did you consider looking at sort of the future development plans for any of the areas and considering potentially how you could incorporate future developments, you know, such as things like around Stratford and the Olympic Park?
Yeah, so the data was the workplace population from the census, so that it's actually expected to increase, I would assume, from 2011. Also, so when the 2021 census does come out, I think it'd be interesting to update those values to see where the change in employment density have happened. But also, given the pandemic, that might be, I don't know if they made provisions in the census to specify that a lot of people might not be traveling to work. So a lot of people might report working from home instead of working from their usual place of work. So that would be something to take into consideration as well. But yeah, overall, the results the actual numbers have probably most likely have changed. So it'd be interesting to update them once new data are available.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about the census, because I know there's a bit of debate about that. In Scotland, delayed their census for a year for exactly that reason, so it could capture more realistically people's work patterns rather than patterns during COVID. One very quick final question, you might be able to see it in the chat. One domain of IMD is transport, which is closely linked with Crossrail. Have you looked at how Crossrail changed the transport deprivation at all?
I did not see that domain. No, the short answer is no. But I did not see that domain of deprivation on the data set I used. I think there was no provision for transport that I know of. But if there is, I would be very interested in looking at it and seeing how it relates to Crossrail.